The day our entire battle fleet stopped dead in space because of one human female's glare, I knew we had underestimated them. Again, my name is Crick Small, and I serve as tactical observer aboard the Sovereign-class dreadnought Bonecrusher. Yes, that's actually what we named it. We Gorthak aren't known for subtlety or, frankly, much creativity in our naming conventions. But we are known for one thing: winning wars. Until today. Commander Crick Small. The communications officer's voice cracked through his translator implant, panic bleeding through even the electronic modulation. All ships report complete engine failure. We are just floating here. I stared at the main display screen, watching our proud armada of 237 warships drift helplessly through the void like space debris. Each vessel, from the smallest patrol craft to our massive planet crackers, had simply stopped. No explosions, no warning signs, no technical malfunctions. They just stopped, and there, floating in the center of our formation in what appeared to be nothing more than a modified cargo hauler, was the cause of our humiliation: a single human female, standing at the observation deck of her laughably small vessel, arms crossed, staring directly at us through the transparent aluminum barrier. "Sir?" My aide, a nervous young Gorthak named Fendar, shifted his weight from one foot to another. Should we attempt communication? I wanted to laugh. Here we were, the most feared military force in 3 sectors, reduced to asking permission to talk because one tiny human had somehow turned our ships into expensive paperweights with nothing but a dirty look. Yes, Fendar. Please, by all means, let's ask the primitive human what she'd like us to do next. The sarcasm in my voice could have corroded hull plating, but as I watched her through our long-range scanners, something cold crawled up my spine. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't running. She wasn't even looking surprised that she'd just neutralized an entire fleet. That's when I realized we might be in serious trouble. The communication channel crackled to life, and a voice came through that sounded entirely too calm for someone facing down a military force capable of glassing planets. Well, look what the cosmic cat dragged in." The human's voice carried an accent I couldn't place, but the tone was unmistakably amused. "You boys lost or something? Because if you are looking for directions, I'm fresh out of helpful suggestions." I keyed the response channel, trying to project authority I wasn't entirely sure I still possessed. "This is Commander Crick Small of the Gorthak Imperial Navy. You are in violation of approximately 47 different interstellar treaties by interfering with military vessels. Surrender immediately, or face the consequences." Her laughter came through so clearly I could practically see her throwing her head back in amusement. "Oh, sweetie. Consequences? Really? You might want to look around before you start making threats." And she was right. Our ships weren't just stopped. They were completely powerless. Life support was functioning. Artificial gravity was still online, but engines, weapons, shields, everything that made us a threat was offline. "How?" I asked, abandoning protocol entirely. "How are you doing this?" Now that's a better question. I could hear the smile in her voice. "My name's Riley Parker, and I suppose you could say I'm what you might call gifted." Riley Parker. I made a mental note of the name, though I suspected it wouldn't matter much if we couldn't figure out how to get our ships moving again. "What do you want?" I asked, because clearly traditional diplomacy wasn't going to work here. "What do I want?" She paused, and I could see her tapping a finger against her chin through the scanner display. "Well, I was having a perfectly lovely day hauling medical supplies to the Nexus 7 colony when your little parade showed up. So really the question is, what do you want?" I glanced at my mission briefing pad. Our orders were clear: intercept and capture any human vessels operating in this sector for interrogation regarding recent human military advances. The High Command was growing increasingly concerned about human technological development, and they wanted answers. Looking at our current situation, I was beginning to understand their concern. "We are conducting routine security sweeps." I lied smoothly. "Your vessel requires inspection." "Uh-huh." The skepticism in her voice was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. "Routine security sweeps that require 237 warships. Either you guys are the most paranoid security force in the galaxy, or you are lying through whatever you use for teeth." Thindar leaned over and whispered, "Sir, how does she know how many ships we have?" Our formation should have been impossible to count from her position. Good question. Another good question was how she'd managed to disable every single ship simultaneously without us detecting any weapon signatures, energy discharges, or even electromagnetic pulses. Ms. Parker, I said, trying a different approach. I'm prepared to offer you safe passage if you release our vessels and allow us to continue our patrol. Oh, how generous of you. Her voice dripped with mock gratitude. You show up in my neighborhood with enough firepower to turn a planet into cosmic dust, and then you offer me safe passage if I play nice. That's adorable. I was beginning to suspect that Riley Parker was not impressed by displays of military might. This was unusual in my experience. What would it take for you to release our ships? I asked, deciding that honesty might be worth trying. Now we are getting somewhere. I could see her moving around in her observation deck, and for the first time I noticed she wasn't alone. There were at least a dozen other humans visible on her ship, all of them going about their business as if parking an entire fleet wasn't particularly noteworthy. First, I want to know why you are really here. And don't give me any more garbage about routine patrols. Nobody brings planet crackers on a routine patrol unless they are planning to crack some planets. She had a point. Our formation included enough firepower to reduce a medium-sized world to rubble, which was definitely overkill for standard security operations. Second, she continued, I want assurances that you are not planning to interfere with my delivery run. Those medical supplies I mentioned? They are for a colony that's dealing with a plague outbreak. People are dying while we have this lovely chat. I felt a stab of something that might have been guilt. The Gorthak military had many virtues, but humanitarian concern wasn't typically one of them. And third, Riley's voice took on a harder edge. I want you to explain why your government thinks it's acceptable to ambush civilian cargo haulers. Because that's what this was supposed to be, wasn't it? You were planning to grab me and my crew for some enhanced interrogation sessions. How in the name of the void did she know that? Miss Parker, I said carefully, I think there may be some misunderstanding here. Oh, there's definitely a misunderstanding. Her laugh was sharp now, with none of the earlier amusement. You folks seem to think humans are still the same species you first encountered 50 years ago. Cute, primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel. I didn't respond, because that was exactly what our intelligence reports suggested. Here's the thing, Commander Crix. Maul, the way she said my name sent chills down my spine. We have been watching you, all of you, every species that's been sizing us up, wondering if we are worth conquering, trading with, or just wiping out entirely. And we have been learning. Through the scanner, I watched her move to the center of her observation deck, spreading her arms wide. We have been learning about your technology, your military tactics, your political structures, but most importantly, we have been learning about ourselves. The lights on my command bridge flickered. Not our lights. Every light on every ship in the fleet flickered simultaneously. You see, when you spend decades being underestimated, you develop certain advantages. You learn to pay attention. You learn to adapt. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very careful, you learn to do things that shouldn't be possible. I looked at my crew, all of whom were staring at their instruments with expressions of growing alarm. Our chief engineer was frantically running diagnostics, but I could tell from his body language that he wasn't finding answers. What are you? I asked, because Riley Parker was clearly not a typical human cargo hauler. What happens when you push a species that's very good at learning and very bad at giving up? Her voice carried a note of pride now. Also what happens when you threaten a medical supply run to dying colonists. That tends to make me irritable. As if to emphasize her point, every weapon system on every ship in our fleet cycled through a power-up sequence, targeting systems locking onto random points in space before shutting down again. Impressive, I managed. How? Trade secret. I could practically hear her grinning. But I will give you a hint. Evolution doesn't stop just because you reach the stars. Sometimes it speeds up. Dandar was tugging at my sleeve urgently. Sir, you need to see this. I looked at his scanner display and felt my blood turn to ice water. The readout showed massive energy signatures building throughout human space. Not ships. Something else entirely. Something our instruments couldn't properly identify, but which was clearly artificial and clearly powerful. Miss Parker, I said slowly, what exactly are those energy signatures? Oh, those? Just some friends of mine. Turns out when you spend decades getting pushed around by species with bigger fleets, you start developing contingency plans. Lots of contingency plans. The scanner display updated, showing the energy signatures moving, fast, in our direction. How many friends? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Well, that depends. Riley's voice was cheerful again, which somehow made it more terrifying. How many of your ships would you like to get home in one piece? I looked around by bridge at crew members who were supposed to be the finest military minds of our generation and saw only confusion and fear. We had walked into something completely outside our understanding, and our opponent was offering us a way out. All of them, I said honestly. Good answer. I like honesty. It's refreshing. There was a pause, and I could see Riley conferring with her crew members. Here's what's going to happen, Commander. You are going to turn your beautiful fleet around and head back where you came from. You are going to file a report explaining that human space is now off limits for uninvited military expeditions, and you are going to recommend that your government engage in proper diplomatic channels if they want to talk to us. And if I refuse, well, Riley said thoughtfully, then you will find out what happens when humans stop being nice about being underestimated. The energy signatures on our scanners were getting closer, much closer. But I don't think you will refuse, she continued, because you are smart enough to recognize when you are outmatched, and right now, Commander Krixmall, you are very, very outmatched. I stared at the tactical display, at our powerless fleet, at the approaching energy signatures that our instruments couldn't even properly categorize. Then I looked at the small cargo hauler floating serenely in the middle of our formation, with one human female who had just redefined everything we thought we knew about their species. Miss Parker, I said finally, I believe you have made your point. Excellent. Her voice was warm with approval. I do so hate having to resort to demonstrations. They are messy and someone always ends up filing paperwork. Our engines suddenly hummed back to life. Weapon systems came online, shields powered up, and navigation controls responded normally. In the space of 3 seconds, we went from helpless drifters to a fully functional fleet again. Oh, and Commander? Riley's voice carried one final note. When you file that report, make sure you mention that this was the polite version of first contact, because next time we might not be in such a good mood. The communication channel closed, and I watched the small cargo hauler accelerate smoothly away from our formation, heading toward the Nexus 7 colony and its medical delivery mission. Sir? Dandar's voice was barely above a whisper. Orders? I looked at the tactical display one more time. The energy signatures were dispersing, fading back into whatever dimension they'd emerged from. But they'd been real, and they'd been massive. Set course for home. I said quietly, maximum speed. What do I log as the reason for mission termination? I thought about that for a long moment. How do you explain that a single human civilian just schooled an entire battle fleet? How do you report that everything your intelligence services believed about human capabilities was wrong? Equipment malfunction, I said finally. Cite it as a fleet-wide systems failure that prevented mission completion. It wasn't exactly a lie. Our equipment had certainly failed to work as expected. We just hadn't realized until today that the failure was in our understanding, not our technology. As our ships moved away from human space, I found myself thinking about Riley Parker's words. Evolution doesn't stop just because you reach the stars. Sometimes it speeds up. Maybe it was time for our intelligence services to stop thinking of humans as the same species they'd first encountered. Maybe it was time to start thinking of them as something entirely new. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start being very, very careful about how we approached them in the future. Because if Riley Parker was any indication, the humans weren't done evolving yet. And the next time we met them, they might not be in such a diplomatic mood. The journey back to Gorthak space was going to be a long one. I had a lot of thinking to do and even more explaining to prepare for. But one thing was certain, the galaxy had just become a much more interesting place. And probably a much more dangerous one too. 3 days after Riley Parker made our entire fleet look like floating scrap metal, I stood before the Gorthak High Command trying to explain how one human female had rewritten everything we knew about interstellar warfare. The looks on their faces suggested they thought I'd suffered some kind of neural breakdown. Let me understand this correctly, Commander Krix Mal. Fleet Admiral Torvax leaned forward in his command chair, his massive frame casting shadows across the briefing room. You are telling us that a single human, operating a cargo vessel, disabled 237 military ships without firing a shot. That's correct, Admiral. And she did this? How exactly? I'd been dreading this question for 3 days. Unknown, sir. Our technical analysis teams have been working around the clock, and they can't find any evidence of weapon discharge, electromagnetic interference, or technological sabotage. Our ships simply stopped. The silence in the room was deafening. Around the semicircular table sat the most powerful military minds in Gorthak space, and not one of them looked like they believed a word I was saying. Commander, General Hex Prime's voice carried the barely controlled rage of someone whose worldview was being challenged. Are you suggesting that humans have developed some form of technology that can disable our ships without leaving any detectable trace? I'm not suggesting anything, General. I'm reporting what happened. What happened? Admiral Torvax said slowly. Is impossible. Our intelligence reports are very clear about human technological capabilities. They have only been in space for 70 years. They don't have the scientific foundation to develop anything that could threaten our fleet. I thought about Riley Parker's smile, about the way she'd casually mentioned that evolution doesn't stop just because you reach the stars. With respect, Admiral, perhaps our intelligence reports are wrong. The room erupted in angry murmurs. General Hex Prime slammed his fist on the table, creating a sound like a small explosion. Our intelligence network is the finest in the galaxy. We have operatives embedded in every major human colony, monitoring their research facilities, tracking their military development. They are barely past chemical rockets and nuclear fusion. Then explain this. I activated the holographic display and showed them the sensor readings from our encounter. Energy signatures that defied classification, power levels that shouldn't have been possible. And most disturbing of all, the complete lack of any identifiable technology that could have caused our shutdown. The room fell quiet again as the military leadership studied the data. I watched their expressions change from skepticism to confusion to something that might have been fear. This could be fabricated, suggested Intelligence Director Nexro. Though his voice lacked conviction. It could be, I agreed. But it's not. Every ship in the fleet recorded the same data. 237 independent sensor arrays can't all be wrong. Admiral Torvax stood and began pacing, a habit he'd developed during his 40-year military career. Even if we accept this data as accurate, there must be a logical explanation. Hidden technology. Perhaps. Or assistance from another species. There's another possibility, I said quietly. Which is that we have fundamentally misunderstood what humans are becoming. The pacing stopped. Admiral Torvax turned to stare at me with an expression that suggested I'd just proposed surrendering the entire empire to a collective of space merchants. Explain. I took a deep breath and prepared to destroy my military career. What if humans aren't developing technology to compete with us? What if they are developing something else entirely? Before anyone could respond, the emergency communications system activated. The wall display flickered to life, showing the face of Captain Kix Ven, commanding officer of our border monitoring station. Admiral Torvax, we have a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting massive human fleet movements throughout their space. At least 50,000 vessels, all moving toward our border. The blood drained from my face. 50,000 ships? The entire human space navy was supposed to number less than 5,000 vessels, most of them converted civilian craft for classification. Admiral Torvax demanded. Unknown, sir. The ships don't match any designs in our database. They are like nothing we have ever seen before. Size estimates. Captain Kix Ven paused, checking his instruments. Sir, some of these vessels are reading as larger than our capital ships. Much larger. And the energy signatures? He trailed off, shaking his head. What about the energy signatures? They are similar to what Commander Krix Mal reported. Massive, unclassified, and frankly impossible according to our understanding of physics. I felt a cold weight settling in my stomach. Riley Parker hadn't been bluffing about her friends. Time to intercept? Admiral Torvax asked. At current speed, approximately 18 hours. But sir, there's something else. What? They are not heading for our military installations, they are heading straight for the capital. The room exploded into chaos. Voices shouted over each other demanding explanations, calling for immediate mobilization of all available forces, arguing about diplomatic protocols. Through it all, Admiral Torvax stood perfectly still, staring at the display. Silent protocol, he said quietly, and the room immediately fell silent. Captain Kix Ven, are you certain about these numbers? Confirmed, Admiral. 50,000 vessels and counting. Sir, should I begin evacuation procedures for the border colonies? Negative. Continue monitoring and report any changes immediately. The communication link closed, leaving us alone with the implications of what we'd just learned. Well, General Hex Prime said with bitter humor, it appears our intelligence network may have missed a few things. Commander Krixmole, Admiral Torvax turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. It took me a moment to recognize it as uncertainty. You had the most recent contact with human forces. What's your assessment? I thought about Riley Parker standing calmly on her observation deck while our entire fleet drifted helplessly around her. I thought about her casual mention of contingency plans and the way she'd spoken about human evolution. I think we are about to find out what humans have really been doing for the last 70 years, I said. And I don't think we are going to like the answer. Recommendations? Open a communication channel. Try to talk to them before they reach our space. And if they refuse to communicate? I considered that question carefully. Then we hope Riley Parker was right about this being the polite version of first contact. 6 hours later, we had our answer. The human fleet had not only refused communication attempts, they'd responded with a message that sent shockwaves through every level of government. People of the Gorthak Empire. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly terrifying in its certainty. My name is Director Sarah Kim, of the Human Colonial Defense Initiative. We understand that your military forces recently attempted to intercept and capture one of our civilian vessels engaged in humanitarian operations. I recognize the tone. It was the same controlled politeness Riley Parker had used just before demonstrating that our fleet was obsolete. We also understand that this incident was part of a broader pattern of harassment and intimidation directed at human colonies throughout this sector. This pattern ends now. The transmission continued, but I was no longer listening to the words. I was watching the tactical display as 50,000 human ships arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around our capital system. Not approaching, not threatening. Just there. We are not here to conquest your territory or harm your people. We are here to establish new rules of engagement between our species. Rules that recognize certain fundamental realities about who we are and who we are becoming. Director Kim's image appeared on the main display. She was younger than Riley Parker, with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through the camera. But she had the same unsettling confidence. The same sense that she knew things the rest of us didn't. Effective immediately, human space is declared a restricted zone for all military vessels of non-allied species. Humanitarian missions will be permitted after proper coordination through diplomatic channels. Commercial trade will continue under existing agreements. Military incursions will be discouraged. The way she said discouraged made my skin crawl. We hope this arrangement will prove beneficial to all parties involved. We have no desire for conflict, but we are prepared for it should circumstances require. Please consider this message carefully and respond through appropriate diplomatic channels within 48 hours. The transmission ended, leaving us staring at a tactical display that showed the most massive fleet deployment in recorded galactic history holding position around our homeworld. Well, Admiral Torvax said into the silence, that was certainly direct. Sir, Intelligence Director Nexrel was frantically working at his console. I'm getting reports from our deep space monitoring stations. Similar fleet movements near the Zaraf Confederation, the Morlack Republic, and the Centran Alliance. They are not just talking to us. They are talking to everyone, I realized. Every major military power in this sector of the galaxy. Simultaneously, General Hex Prime added grimly, which means they have the force projection capability to threaten multiple civilizations at once. I thought about the mathematics of that. To deploy 50,000 ships to 4 different star systems simultaneously would require a total fleet strength of at least 200,000 vessels, possibly more, depending on their logistical requirements and defensive commitments. Where had humans been hiding 200,000 warships? Director Nexral, Admiral Torvax said quietly. I want a complete review of every intelligence report we have received about human capabilities over the last 20 years. Everything. Industrial capacity, population figures, technological development, military procurement. I want to know how we missed a fleet buildup of this magnitude. Admiral, I said hesitantly. What if we didn't miss it? Meaning, what if they didn't build these ships in the conventional sense? Riley Parker mentioned that evolution doesn't stop just because you reach the stars. What if humans have found a way to accelerate their development? The room fell silent again. It was one thing to accept that your intelligence network had failed. It was another entirely to consider that the fundamental assumptions underlying your understanding of reality might be wrong. Kriegsmal Admiral Torvax said slowly, "What exactly did this Riley Parker say to you?" I closed my eyes and tried to remember her exact words. She said that when you spend decades being underestimated, you develop certain advantages. She said humans had been learning about everyone else's technology, military tactics, and political structures. But most importantly, they'd been learning about themselves. And she said that sometimes, if you are very lucky and very careful, you learn to do things that shouldn't be possible. General Hex Prime laughed, but there was no humor in it. Are you suggesting that humans have developed some form of supernatural abilities? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm reporting what she said. I paused, remembering the way our entire fleet had simply stopped functioning. But I will note that what she did to our ships also shouldn't have been possible. There has to be a rational explanation, Intelligence Director Nexral insisted. Advanced technology, hidden allies, something we can understand and counter. Does there? I asked. Why? Because the alternative is that we are dealing with something completely outside our comprehension. And if that's true, then everything we think we know about galactic politics, military strategy, and interspecies relations is obsolete. I looked around the room at the faces of the most powerful military leaders in our civilization and saw the same realization dawning on all of them. We weren't just dealing with a diplomatic crisis or a military threat. We were dealing with a fundamental shift in the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Recommendations? Admiral Torvax asked. We respond diplomatically, General Hex Prime said immediately. Acknowledge their message. Request formal negotiations. Try to understand what they actually want. And if negotiations fail, then we hope our allies are having better luck than we are. Over the next 46 hours, as our diplomats worked frantically to open communication channels with the human fleet, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. The Zerif Confederation had agreed to human terms immediately, apparently deciding that their existing trade relationships were more valuable than their military pride. The Morlock Republic was attempting to negotiate modifications to the human proposals, with limited success. The Centran Alliance had initially refused to respond at all until additional human ships had appeared in their core systems. But it was the report from the VAC Consortium that really got our attention. Admiral, the transmission was from our ambassador to the Consortium capital. The humans have done something unprecedented here. The VAC leadership initially rejected their proposals and ordered their fleet to attack the human ships. And the human vessels didn't fire back. They didn't even raise shields. They just sat there. And when the VAC weapons hit them, nothing happened. No damage, no energy absorption, no defensive reaction. The weapons simply had no effect. I felt that familiar cold weight in my stomach. Riley Parker had mentioned that her demonstration was the polite version of first contact. The VAC escalated to planet-killer weapons. Same result. Their most powerful weapons simply couldn't touch the human ships. How is that possible? Unknown, sir. But after 6 hours of ineffective bombardment, the human fleet responded. They didn't destroy the VAC ships. They didn't even damage them. They just turned them off. Every vac vessel in the system went dead. Life support, artificial gravity, everything. The humans kept them alive, but completely helpless. For how long? 12 hours. Then they reactivated the VAC systems and repeated their original diplomatic message. The VAC consortium accepted human terms within minutes. I thought about that timeline. 12 hours of floating helplessly in space, completely dependent on your enemy's mercy, would certainly provide motivation for diplomatic flexibility. Sir, the ambassador continued, there's something else. The humans left behind a small observation post. The VEC were reporting that it's unusual. How so? It appears to be alive, sir. Not a ship with living crew, but actually a living structure. It's growing, adapting to local conditions, and according to VAC sensors, it's somehow integrated with the quantum fabric of local space. That was a new development, and a deeply disturbing one. Any word on human intentions regarding the observation post? They have described it as a monitoring station to ensure compliance with their new security arrangements. The VACs are too terrified to object. When the transmission ended, Admiral Torvax was standing at the main display staring at the 50,000 human ships holding position around our capital. They hadn't moved in 2 days, hadn't made any threatening gestures, hadn't even acknowledged our repeated communication attempts. They were just waiting. Crick Small, he said, without turning around. In your opinion, what happens if we refuse their terms? I thought about Riley Parker's final warning, about demonstration versus what happens when humans stop being nice. I thought about the VAX fleet floating helplessly in space for 12 hours, and about living observation posts that integrated with quantum space. I think we find out what the impolite version of first contact looks like, I said honestly. And if we accept, then we adapt to a galaxy where humans are no longer the species everyone underestimates. Admiral Torvax was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he turned to face the assembled command staff. Draft a response accepting human terms. Schedule formal negotiations for next week. And get me a direct communication line to this Director Kim. Sir? General Hex Prime looked stunned. Are we surrendering? We are adapting, Admiral Torvax replied. Because the alternative appears to be extinction. 3 hours later, I found myself on a secure communication channel with Director Sarah Kim. Her image appeared on my personal screen, and I was struck again by the same unsettling confidence I'd seen in Riley Parker. Commander Crick Small, she said warmly. Riley mentioned you. She was quite impressed with your professionalism during your recent encounter. Director Kim, I hope we can find a mutually acceptable resolution to this situation. I'm confident we can. Humans have always preferred cooperation to conflict when possible. And when it's not possible, her smile didn't change. But something shifted in her eyes. Then we do what we have to do. But I don't think that will be necessary here. Your government has shown remarkable wisdom in responding diplomatically. May I ask you something, Director? Of course. How long have you been planning this? Planning what, Commander? This, the fleet deployment. The simultaneous contact with multiple species, the demonstrations of capability. This level of coordination doesn't happen overnight. Director Kim leaned back in her chair, considering my question. How long do you think a species should wait before asserting their right to exist without constant military harassment? That's not an answer. No, it's not. Her smile was genuinely amused now. But it's the only answer you are going to get. Some secrets are worth keeping. Even from potential allies? Especially from potential allies. Trust is something that develops over time, Commander. Right now, we are just establishing the ground rules for future relationships. I thought about the living observation post the humans had left in Vex space, about energy signatures that defied classification, about 50,000 ships that had appeared as if from nowhere. Director, what have you become? For the first time since our conversation began, her expression grew serious. We had become what we needed to become, Commander Kriksmal. Nothing more, nothing less. The communication ended, leaving me alone with questions that would probably never be answered. But as I sat in my quarters, looking out at the human fleet, maintaining its perfect sphere around our homeworld, I realized that maybe the questions weren't as important as the reality. Humanity had emerged from 70 years of being underestimated to become something that could casually deploy fleets capable of intimidating entire civilizations. They'd developed capabilities that our science couldn't explain, technologies that our instruments couldn't properly detect, and a level of strategic coordination that suggested planning on a scale we'd never imagined. And they'd done it all while letting everyone else believe they were still struggling with basic space travel. Riley Parker had been right about one thing. Evolution doesn't stop just because you reach the stars. Sometimes it speeds up, and sometimes, if you are not paying attention, it leaves you behind entirely. The galaxy was going to be a very different place from now on, and for the first time in my military career, I wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or a terrifying one. But I was sure of one thing. Underestimating humans was a mistake no one would make twice. Not anymore.